Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astoma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om, may He protect us both together. May He nourish us both together. May we work conjointly with great energy. May our study also be vigorous and effective. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So we continue with our series of 13th chapter. And you'll recall that this chapter is in connection with the field and the knower of the field. It's a very important subject and presents really in a wonderfully graphic way the idea that all our experience, our environmental experience, starting with the human body, is something like a field of activity. And there is a knower of the field. But how do we actually get to grips with this? How do we realize this is a very important question. And so Srimad Bhagavad Gita, from the 7th stanza on to the 11th, gives us a kind of self-culture. It gives us a number of different values that we can cultivate in order to present the mind with a very clear platform, like a kind of lake where everything is still and self-revelation takes place by itself. The field is comprised of all the tattvas of the Sankhya system, all the categories, and we've dealt with it previously in a great detail. Now later we have to understand, even though it's very abstract, what is this knower of the field? But we all really have some understanding of it. One thing that we cannot deny is the sense of consciousness. Everybody is self-conscious. Everybody understands I exist, and everybody understands that what consciousness is. We can't prove that you are conscious, but we can certainly prove to ourselves that we ourselves are conscious. So a number of different outcomes of dealing with this field are there, described as desire, hatred, pleasure, pain, pairs of opposites, and then what's described as aggregate. That means the assemblage of all the parts representing the body. We can say the body and mind. But Chetana, the intelligence, is dealt with separately. It's the power to reveal, the power to interpret is there. And should not be, of course, confused with the real consciousness, which is the Atma. And then we require dhritti, firmness, stamina. Biologically, what we can call the will to live, survival of the fittest. There's something within us that wants to purposefully move in a certain direction. Of course, material science will deny that. The neo-Darwinian position of evolution says that, and Richard Dawkins, for example, the great atheist, will tell us that it looks as if everything is so well designed, but we are deluded in this. In fact, it's a blind watchmaker. Now, a blind watchmaker, when you look at it properly, to make that really purposeless, would have to be not just blind, but comatose. So why should we look after this field that we call the body, that aspect of it? Is because it contains something enormously precious, something that is indescribable, something that is so deep, so profound, so infinite, and yet is invisible to us. And this will be revealed to us once this mind is purified. So for this reason, self-culture is necessary. We can't sit back and expect things to come to us. We have to put in some form of self-effort. And the self-effort that we put in is simply taking or grasping all the small opportunities that are presented to us. In today's thought and prayer, it was described that the divine entity, full of grace, full of supportive understanding, only gives us a small, limited few steps, a little bit of view. That divine illuminating, divine light only reveals a few yards in front. Otherwise, we'll die from madness if we see the whole picture. Supposing I want to go from here to Galway, then I don't get in my car and expect the car or the headlamps to illuminate the whole distance. Even if I'm in an airplane, the distance is too big for that. All I need is to know the next few yards. The next few meters is enough. And then when I get to the end of that, another next few meters. So this we call really time and space. Time and space is given to us so that we can progress bit by bit at our own pace, progressively, without any fear or favor, just moving on gently, gliding along to our destiny. So all we need to know is what will happen in the next hour, in the next few hours. That's all, and put what we want in. But not the next future, the next few years, not the next few months even, or the next few weeks. This is held back as a kind of surprise for us. It's kept in store. Otherwise, we'll just have too much to deal with. There's a beautiful Christian hymn. It says, Lord, for tomorrow and its needs, I do not pray. And keep me, my Lord, from stain of ignorance will adapt it. But for when? Just for today. No more. Just for today. Deal with today. Once I've dealt with today, and even today, once I've dealt with this minute and this second, that's fine. Then I'll go to the next thing and the next thing. So let us see what these self-culture virtues are. And it's a whole list. It starts off with the most important thing that we require, humility. We need to feel that we are the same as everyone else, and that can only come through a cosmic understanding. The cosmic understanding will make us non-injurious to others also. When we understand that there's only one whole, then we also understand that anything that we do injurious to one, we do for all, including ourselves. But we don't start off with that. We start off with amanitum. Amanitum, that is the quality of humility. And after amanitum, we have adambitum, that is unpretentiousness, modesty. So one refers to equality, and the next one refers to boasting about achievements. The achievements don't belong to us. And then, of course, there's ahimsa, is a great quality, wonderful quality. Ahimsa is a key quality, both in Patanjali Yoga Sutras and here. We cannot really have this ahimsa if we have any sense of individuality. If we think that this fragmented universe of parts, all these parts are different, are separate, are unique in their own right, and so on, and not connected in any way with the other, then we cannot actually practice this ahimsa. So let's go through the full list of qualities. Amanitum, adambitum, ahimsa, kshanti, arjalvam. Acharya pasanam, shocham, staryam, atma vinagraha. Atma vinigraha, that is, excuse me, self-control. So all of these qualities we require: humility, modesty, this non-injury. The opposite side of the coin of it is pure love for all, forbearance. We require a lot of forbearance today. That is, when people criticize us or blame us or injure us, we stoically remain steadfast in our values. It's not to say we become a walkover, but we don't become vengeful. Same kind of patience is required for the difficult situations that we sometimes find ourselves in. So people are suffering, there's no doubt at the moment, we're all aware of this, but then there's a subtle side of it. I got a text from somebody, said, my child is missing their friends. So they've blown up a lot of balloons and they're naming these balloons after their friends. And so it's quite sad to see that these children are isolated from their friends. The normal condition is to be with their friends. So the suffering is different for different people on different levels also. And then uprightness means that we are truthful in our thought and our words and our deeds, all are matching, that we look exactly the same in our home environment as we do in the public area. And then, of course, we have what is called service to the teacher. Why do we place any emphasis on this? Is because we get all their knowledge from the competent teacher. And we have to preserve that teacher so that knowledge can also be preserved. But it's also the individual unconsciously imbibes the traits of the teacher, of the person whom he serves or she serves. So by doing some physical service to the teacher, the disciple gets into the teacher's holy disposition. And then we require purity. Purity pertains both to body and mind. A bodily purity can be affected with the aid of air, water, all these components of the environment, sunlight, and so on. Those who deprive themselves of sunlight deprive themselves of the vitamin D. So, leading a healthy, wholesome life where the external body is clean, where the internal workings of the body is clean, and where we take advantage of the environment, where clean air is there, good food is there, all of these things are necessary. And then there has to be this quality of steadfastness. That is, we have to be mindful of the time taken for this very self culture. Sometimes we have to plod along through a few births, but we have to be patient about it. There's the famous story that Swami Vivekananda tells us. Narendra happened to be passing by two yogis. One was practicing so intensely, he was such an ascetic, that the whole forest, creepers had grown on and around him. Or, Narada, you're from heaven, you're coming this way. Can you please, when you go back, ask the Lord of the universe, how many births do I still have? And then there was another devotee singing and dancing. He says, please ask the same. Anyway, after some time, Narada happened to be passing that way again. And to the ascetic, he said, I have to tell you, only 4 more births. What? 4 more births? All of this? I practiced so hard. I've undergone all this great tapasya and all this great hardship, and I still have 4 births to go. And he started to get very angry. And then the other fellow asked the same thing, and me, what is it for me? See the leaves on this tree. As many leaves and buds as are on this tree, that many births you will have to have. What? Only that much? And he danced in rejoicing. And the outcome, of course, was that one who had this great joyous moment was given this instant freedom there and then. And the other one had to endure the births. So we have to be steadfast in our practice and be joyful in our practice. We're not trying to achieve something in the future. We have whatever is to be had is right here and right now. But we have to take measures to clean the mind so that we can understand it. And then this leads, of course, to self-control. Self-control is the opposite of self-indulgence. And self-indulgence dissipates the personality. What does self-indulgence do? You see, under a crisis, people are tempted to take this world as their reality and then to compensate themselves by eating or drinking or indulging any number of the senses. This is the way that they psychologically compensate themselves for an allegedly miserable life. Some pleasure is there, an impulse that the mind has towards some kind of pleasure that will stimulate all the chemicals in the mind, serotonin and the rest, not realizing that if we sip the nectar of divine grace and bliss, then we get that same serotonin and we're able to sustain it and more. The Taittiriya Upanishad gives us a whole ranking of bliss. And gives some examples of human areas where we can find bliss. And it says greater than this bliss, and it goes on to the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. But the highest bliss is the bliss of the Atma. And then we go on then to the second part, more qualities. Dispassion towards the objects of the senses, that has to be done. Again, we mentioned how people seem to find a compensation in terms of the objects of things, because that's where they feel the reality lies. But don't forget, this is chapter 13, and it is a whole discourse on discernment between kshetra and kshetrajna, between the field and the knower of the field. This constant classification has to be done. And when we understand the hollowness of the objects of the senses, then we will no longer have the passion and attachment that we formerly had. So, and also the absence of egoism. This is where we start in our practical spiritual life here at the Ed Vedanta Society, a personality development course where the particular ego is identified. And that particular ego then is explored and dealt with because it's the key obstacle. And so we say, Indriyateshu varagyam anahamkara evacha. And then we go on to say, Janma mrityo jara vyadhi dukkha doshanudarshanam. And then the perception of evil in birth. We're actually, I'm in birth and death and also old age and sickness and pain. All of those examples that the Lord Buddha, as Siddhartha, Gautama Siddhartha, discovered. He went out in his chariot and there he discovered all these various modes of life. He saw somebody who was diseased. He saw somebody who was sick. He saw somebody who was old. He saw some dead corpse being taken. And finally, he saw the renunciant. And this inspired him. So we can say that nature bears evidence to the truth that beings evolve slowly from lower form to existence to the higher. This is not a new revelation belonging to Wallace and Darwin. This really was known previously. And we have Lamarck, who understands it also, even before, some 50 years before Darwin. But way back in the ancient world of our sages, we understood this was what was taken for granted. So we don't have any argument between this evolution and creation. There's no creation in the system of Vedanta. There's Shasti, there is this projection, this manifestation. And so therefore, from that comes a gradually evolving scenario. And we see this when we look at the field, we see the evolution of these tattvas. We see the evolution of these tanmatras, these mahabhutas, that evolve ultimately into the senses and the objects of the senses. So there are stages of mental evolution too that we have to strive for. Are we fully evolved? Is an interesting question that people are asking these days. Having gone through this evolutionary process, arriving at man, what do we have to evolve more to? And some people suggest, well, maybe the head will shrink, or maybe the legs will develop into wheels, since most people are sedentary these days. So that's not what is meant. The evolution really ultimately comes when we realize that we are that. We are that entity. We are the supreme, infinite, invisible. And so evolution of the human body is complete at the human level. We leave it there. But there are, of course, stages of mental evolution that we have to strive for. And we have to perfect the mind through ethical spiritual disciplines. We shouldn't stagnate. We shouldn't lay back. There's no need to lay on our laurels. We shouldn't have a sauntering attitude. We should take this endeavor seriously. And you see, Shankaracharya points out in his Viveka Shudamani that we are fortunate to have this birth. Through many, many thousands, millions of births, we've arrived here. And to waste it, really, particularly when we have the opportunity to study scripture and to be in the presence of a competent teacher, and all of these advantages are there for us. To waste them is tantamount to suicide. So we have to cultivate the sense of detachment from the mundane, an attachment to the supramundane that we call God. And the craving for the objects of the senses gives place to a holy hankering after the divine. Every one of these things are displacements. Dispassion towards the objects is passion toward the Lord of the universe. Absence of egoism is replaced by an attitude of, I am your servant or your instrument, or by, I'm seeing your glory displayed through all these hands and eyes and ears and heads. And this drama of birth, death, and old age, sickness, and pain is just a cycle that will repeat and repeat and repeat if we're not careful. So Sri Ramakrishna has this to say. He says, man grows in devotion to the Lord in direct proportion to his attachment from the objects of the senses. The more we think the world is real, the less we think that God is real. The more we think God is real, the less we think that the objects of the senses are unreal. And when we say unreal and real, when we use these terms, we're talking of something that is enduring, not something that is momentary. Asaktir anibishvagangaha putra dhara kridhadishu nityam cha samachitatum ishtanishto papadishu. Unattachment, ashakti, unattachment, non-identification, anabhigvagana, of self with children, wife, home, domestic environments, and so on. And constant equanimity in the occurrence of desirable and the undesirable. All of these things should be cultivated. See, there are objects of senses which we get very deeply attached to. And if we don't anymore get any enjoyment from them, then the attachment leaves off by itself. So such attachments require to be eliminated. How? By the sword of discrimination. Now Sri Ramakrishna says, a person found it very difficult to meditate on God because of his inordinate attachment to a relative. Behold your favorite relative as God, come in that form, was the advice given to him. And on pursuance, that attitude in meditation on the Lord became easy to that person. Sri Ramakrishna also gave that advice himself. So we read, what are you attached to? Somebody said, my child, or meditate on your child. Even some people may say, my animal, or meditate on your animal, your favorite goat, or whatever it is. Meditate on that. And make that easy for you, because all forms are his forms. You now transform your attachment to a person or a place by seeing God there and transforming all your feelings, rechanneling them all in that same direction. This is a wonderfully easy way. And then we come across this Maicha Nanya Yogena Bhaktir Avya Bicharini Vivita Desha Sevitam Aratiye Janasam Sadi. Unswerving devotion, Mai to me, Anyan Yogena, by the yoga of what? Of non-separation. Resort to sequestered places things which are solitary. Vivikta desha sevitum. Normally speaking, this ashram would be such a place. Distaste for the society of men, because all men do is men and women, of course. All people gossip. Right now, if you gather a few people together, they'll be all telling you about all kinds of hearsay according to a certain authority. What is that authority? They say. I have no idea who they are. But anyway, they say this and they say that about the COVID-19 virus. And have you heard, if you hold your breath for 3 days, you don't have the virus, or some such things. So we have to be careful who to listen to and who not to listen to, and be selective. Who shall we make friends with? Who shall we dissociate from? And anything that is disturbing our equilibrium of the mind, we have to make an adjustment about it. So Sri Ramakrishna gives a wonderful example. The moth. The moth abandons darkness and rushes to the light of the lamp. And the ant would rather give up its life than sever contact with juice. Even so, the devotee is ever intent on the Lord, and he has no other concern in life. Eats it, drinks it, sleeps it, overwhelmed with the love so that it overflows. Again, it comes to a saturation point and overflows to everybody, becomes a beaming light. You cannot hide your light under a bushel or a bed, says Jesus. And then finally, this 11th stanza. Adhyatma jnana nityatum tattva jnanartha darshanam. Idaj jnanam iti proktam ajnanam yad atonyata. Constancy. This constancy in what? Constancy in self-knowledge. This adhyatma jnana nityatum. Constancy in self-knowledge. The perception of the end of true knowledge, tattva jnana artha darshanam. This is declared to be knowledge. What is opposed to this is ignorance. So constancy in self-knowledge. We might get glimpses of this self-knowledge from time to time, even during reading these passages and listening a little bit to a little bit of commentary on it. An aha moment might have taken place. Aha, that's it. I understand now. And then after a few moments, it may have gone. Or it may last for a night, and then tomorrow it's gone. So constancy, we have to keep the ball up. We have to be skillful in doing this. Like a footballer, skilled, we want to kick the football up and won't return it necessarily with a standard kick. Sometimes hit it with the knee, sometimes the shoulder, sometimes the head, sometimes the foot, sometimes the back of the foot. In this way, a skilled footballer will manipulate the ball in this way, but always keep the ball up high. We always have to keep the mind up high. And when it comes down, we have to wait for it. Aha, notice it. And then with great skill and with great versatility, push it up again using a different method and enjoy the fun of this game. Sentimental devotion to the Maker, of course, is not sufficient. If we think God is our Maker, sentimental devotion is not what we're talking about. We're really talking of non-demanding, selfless love, the kind of love which is ever giving, the kind of love which says, you are my all. There's nothing more. There's no room for anything else except thee. So divine love ought to be seasoned, of course, by this diligent inquiry. This is the importance of this 13th chapter. We have received the neck and drank deep of the nectar of bhakti. But now it's time for for jnana. It's a little bit of understanding and reasoning to bring us down a little bit to earth and to form a good platform, a solid platform, where we can glide to our own blissful base. So all these dispositions elaborated from this 7th stanza to this 11th one contribute jointly to the development of our wisdom, our inner wisdom, and our practice. It gives us a kind of divine eye, an insight, a divine insight, and the intuitive faculty that leads to the realization of this supreme infinite invisible that we call Brahman. And all these dispositions, they're all called jnana, they're all called knowledge because of their great unfailing contribution toward it. And all these dispositions counter those pitfalls of vanity or self-esteem, injury, revengefulness, crookedness, indifference towards even the teacher, not revering the teacher, dirty or unclean or unhygienic habits, fickleness, self-indulgence, or longing for the objects of the senses, or this sense of ownership, active profit actor complex that we call egoism, or the perception of pleasure in bodily life, physical pleasure, or earthly attachment, or the identification with seeming possessions, even family possessions, my children, my son, my daughter, or my wife, or my home, or my bank account, or restlessness due to the occurrence of the desirable and the undesirable, something that makes the mind incredibly turbulent, or the lack of devotion to this personal God, this Lord, or longing for social life and dislike for sacred studies. All of this mitigates against this. This is all antidotes. And so people inclined in these ways contaminate their minds. They don't grow in their wisdom and their self-knowledge. Sri Ramakrishna puts it like this. How is it that we're not able to contact Ishvara? This is a wonderful thing. You say God exists. All right. You see, I've heard people say, you say God exists. What's his email? What's his fax number? What's his personal telephone number? Give me evidence. But you see, it's not like that. We have to ask this question, taking for granted that so great a personality as Krishna, Jesus, etc., will assert this. Ramakrishna himself will assert God is a real empirical experience, who is all-pervading. Given that that is the case, then how is it that we're not able to see it? If we are already full and free, how is it that we don't feel it? How is it that we have no connection with that feeling? And so, standing by the side of a pond covered with moss and reeds, he says, one feels inclined to think that there's no water in it. But the moss has to be pushed aside to see the water below. And here Sri Ramakrishna is thinking of his own village, where he's seen how when you push the dross aside on the top of the water, when you push aside the weed, then you find the clear water there. And so if you do that, one feels inclined to think that there's no water in it. If you just see that, you might think it's a field of green on the top if you don't know any better. But in the same way, Maya, that is the concealing factor that stops us from this contact. This concealing power has to be brushed aside, where from our own mind, before we are blessed with a vision of the all-pervading Ishvara. And this is the whole process we're talking about. Does any good come from this Brahmanyana? Is a question. And so the next stanza will address this. It gives us a definition of Brahman. It tells us now, what is this knower? Excuse me. So, Nyayam yat tat pravakshami yajnatva mritam ashnute anajipmat param brahma nasat tanna na sat uchate. Excuse me. I have a frog in my throat. even though I'm a vegetarian. So he says, I shall describe that which has to be known, knowing which one attains to what is our goal, immortality. Beginningless is the Supreme Brahman. It is not said to be existent or non-existent. Excuse me. So we've now completed this section from stanzas 7 to 11. And we can now go away, and for this coming week, we can practice these virtues and qualities. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.